Gary, Indiana, June 7th, 1963. The small living room of the modest house at 2300 Jackson Street was unusually quiet for a Friday evening. Typically, this space would echo with the sounds of 9 children playing, arguing, and vying for limited resources and attention. But tonight, an air of anticipation had settled over the Jackson household, creating a rare moment of relative calm. Joseph Jackson, the stern patriarch of the family and a factory worker at nearby U.S. Steel, had managed to secure tickets to a Motown revue show at the Indiana Theater in downtown Gary. It was an unprecedented extravagance for the financially strained family, and not everyone would benefit from it. Joseph had determined that only he, his wife Catherine, and their youngest son Michael would attend. At 5 years old, Michael was already showing signs of the musical aptitude that would eventually redefine the landscape of popular entertainment. His perfect pitch, innate sense of rhythm, and ability to mimic the complex vocal stylings he heard on the radio had not gone unnoticed by his father, who had begun to harbor ambitious dreams for his children's musical futures. Joseph's decision to take Michael to the show wasn't merely indulgence. It was investment, a calculated exposure to professional performance that he hoped would accelerate the boy's development. The headliner that night was Diana Ross and the Supremes, the rising stars of Berry Gordy's Motown Records, who were rapidly ascending toward what would become one of the most successful careers in American music history. For Michael, who had only ever heard music on the radio or from his father's guitar, the prospect of seeing real performers on a real stage was nearly overwhelming. As Catherine helped him dress in his best clothes, a small button-up shirt and pants that had been carefully mended and pressed for the occasion, his usual boundless energy had transformed into a quivering anticipation that rendered him uncharacteristically still. "Will they sing Where Did Our Love Go?" he asked, his voice small but vibrating with excitement. Catherine smiled, smoothing his collar. "I expect they will, baby. It's their biggest hit right now." Michael nodded solemnly, absorbing this information with the intense seriousness that often surprised adults who interacted with him. At 5, he already approached music not as entertainment, but as essential study, a subject to be analyzed, internalized, and mastered. Joseph appeared in the doorway, car keys in hand, his expression set in its usual stern lines. "Time to go," he said simply. Though not an affectionate man by nature, there was a subtle softening around his eyes as he observed his youngest son's barely contained excitement. The drive to the Indiana Theater was short but transformative, each block taking them further from the industrial bleakness of their neighborhood and closer to the relative glamour of downtown Gary. Michael sat silent in the back seat, his face pressed against the window, watching the city transform around him. The Indiana Theater itself, with its modest marquee and faded Art Deco details, might have seemed unimpressive to visitors from larger cities. But to 5-year-old Michael, stepping through its doors was like entering an enchanted realm. The red carpets, the ornate ceiling, the plush seats, all of it registered in his wide eyes as confirmation that he was about to experience something truly extraordinary. Their seats were far from the stage, the best Joseph could afford on his factory worker's salary. But Michael didn't seem to notice or care about the distance. From a moment they settled into their places, his attention was absolute, his small body tense with anticipation as he perched on the edge of his seat. The opening acts, local Gary performers followed by a lesser-known Motown group, were received with polite enthusiasm by the audience. But Michael watched them with an intensity that was almost unnerving, his eyes never leaving the stage, his small hands occasionally rising to mimic a gesture or movement that particularly captured his attention. Catherine noticed this studied observation and exchanged a glance with Joseph, who nodded slightly, a rare moment of perfect understanding between the parents. Then the house lights dimmed completely, and a palpable shift in energy rippled through the audience. The band struck up the distinctive opening notes of Where Did Our Love Go?, and 3 sequined figures glided onto the stage, moving with such synchronized precision that they almost appeared to be a single organism with 3 beautiful heads. Diana Ross and the Supremes had arrived. The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet in appreciation. But Michael didn't clap. He didn't cheer. He simply stared, his entire body gone completely still, as if afraid that even the slightest movement might cause him to miss something essential. What happened over the next 45 minutes will be described by Catherine, years later, as the moment Michael found his true north. Diana Ross, then just 19 years old, but already possessing the magnetic stage presence that would make her a legend, commanded the stage with a combination of technical precision and effortless grace. Every gesture, every step, every note seemed both meticulously planned and completely spontaneous, the highest achievement of any performer. Michael watched her with an intensity that transcended ordinary attention. His eyes tracked her movements across the stage, his head tilting occasionally as if to better understand a particular vocal run or physical gesture. When she extended her arms to the audience during a particularly soulful passage, Michael's small arms rose slightly in unconscious mimicry. When she executed a perfect spin that made her sequin dress catch the stage lights like a burst of stars, a small gasp escaped his lips, perhaps the only sound he made during the entire performance. Most striking to Catherine, watching her son as much as she watched the show, was the expression on Michael's face. It wasn't just enjoyment or admiration she saw there. It was recognition, as if he were not so much discovering something new as finding the perfect articulation of something he had always somehow known. When the performance ended and the house lights came up, Michael remained motionless in his seat while the audience around him rose in a standing ovation. Joseph placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a silent prompt to stand and join the applause. But Michael didn't seem to register his father's touch. His eyes remained fixed on the now empty stage, his expression one of complete absorption. "Michael," Catherine said gently, bending down to meet his gaze. "Did you enjoy the show, baby?" For a long moment, Michael didn't respond. Then, slowly, he turned to face his mother. What Catherine saw in his eyes would stay with her for the rest of her life. A look of such profound determination, such absolute clarity of purpose, that it seemed to transform his 5-year-old face into something ancient and knowing. "I can do that," he said simply. There was no childish boasting in his tone, no naive overestimation of his abilities. There was only certainty, the quiet, bone-deep certainty of someone who has just recognized their life's purpose. The drive home was silent, but it was a different quality of silence than the anticipatory quiet of their journey to the theater. This was a silence filled with the weight of revelation, of wheels turning and futures aligning. Michael stared out the window as the lights of downtown Gary receded, replaced by the familiar industrial landscape of their neighborhood. But his eyes seemed focused on something far beyond the steel mills and modest houses, something only he could see. When they arrived home, Michael didn't join his siblings in their usual clamor for details about the rare family outing. Instead, he walked directly to the record player in the corner of the living room, the family's most prized possession, and began carefully flipping through the small collection of 45 stacked beside it. Finding what he was looking for, he removed the record from its sleeve with careful hands that betrayed his youth only in their size, not in their dexterity. His siblings, initially eager to bombard him with questions, fell quiet as they observed the unusual intensity of his focus. With ceremonial precision, Michael placed the record on the turntable, positioned the needle, and stepped back as the opening notes of the Supremes, "Where Did Our Love Go?" filled the small living room. Then, with no introduction or explanation, he began to perform. What his family witnessed in the next 3 minutes could only be described as an act of pure transfiguration. The 5-year-old boy who had left the house earlier that evening had been replaced by something else entirely. Not a child pretending to be Diana Ross, but a performer channeling the very essence of what he had witnessed on stage. Every gesture, every step, every expression was executed with a precision that seemed impossible from a child who had seen the performance exactly once. His small voice, already notable for its purity and pitch, took on the distinctive tonal qualities of Diana Ross with such accuracy that his older siblings exchanged glances of disbelief. His movements, typically those of an energetic but uncoordinated 5-year-old, now flowed with a grace and intention that seemed to belong to a much older, professionally trained performer. Most remarkable of all was his presence, that indefinable quality that separates great technical performers from true stars. Somehow, in the span of a single evening, Michael had not just observed and memorized Diana Ross's performance. He had internalized the very essence of her star power and was now channeling it through his own small body with an authenticity that left his family speechless. When the song ended, the living room fell into a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. For several seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the gentle hiss of the record as the needle continued to track the silent inner groove. Then Tito, at 10 years old, the most musically inclined of the older brothers, whispered a single word. "How?" Michael turned to face his family, and for a brief moment, the unfamiliar intensity that had possessed him during the performance lingered in his eyes. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it receded, replaced by the natural shyness of a 5-year-old boy suddenly aware of being the center of attention. He ducked his head, shuffling his feet slightly. "I just saw it," he said, his voice once again that of a child. "In my head, like a picture." Joseph, who had been standing in the doorway observing with uncharacteristic silence, stepped forward. His expression was difficult to read, a complex mixture of surprise, calculation, and something that in another man might have been identified as awe. "Do it again," he said. It wasn't a request. Michael nodded, his natural desire to please his stern father overriding his momentary shyness. Once more, he moved to the record player, lifted the needle, and placed it at the beginning of the track. Once more, the transformation occurred, the child disappearing, replaced by this uncanny vessel of performance that seemed to contain multitudes. This time, Joseph watched with the focused attention of a man reassessing possibilities and recalculating futures. When the second performance concluded, he nodded once, a gesture of decision rather than approval. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin rehearsals. All of you." He gestured to include all of the brothers present. "What you just saw, that's the standard now." The older boys exchanged nervous glances, already understanding on some level that their lives had just changed irrevocably. But Michael simply nodded, accepting his father's pronouncement not as a burden, but as a confirmation of the path that had been revealed to him just hours earlier. That night, long after the other children had gone to bed, Catherine found Michael sitting alone by the record player in the darkness. The Supremes' record was playing again, the volume turned low so as not to wake the household. He wasn't performing now, just listening with that same intensity she had observed at the theater, as if trying to extract some essential secret hidden between notes. "It's late, baby," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Time for sleep." Michael looked up at her, and in the dim light filtering through the window, she could see that his eyes were wide with a kind of wonder that made him appear even younger than his 5 years. "Mama," he whispered, "when I grow up, I'm going to do that. Just like her." But even more, there was no childish boasting in his tone, no naive dreams of fame. There was only that same quiet certainty she had heard in the theater, the voice of someone who has glimpsed their own future with perfect clarity. Catherine, a deeply religious woman who believed in divine purpose, felt a shiver of recognition. She had raised enough children to know the difference between ordinary childhood fantasies and something deeper, more authentic. What she heard in her youngest son's voice was the latter, a calling rather than a wish. "I believe you will, Michael," she said, gathering him into her arms. "I truly believe you will. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more moments that define the king of pop's extraordinary journey." The next morning unfolded differently than any previous Saturday in the Jackson household. Typically, weekend mornings were a brief respite from Joseph's strict discipline, a few precious hours when the children could play before chores and responsibilities claimed the day. But this Saturday, Joseph woke the household at dawn. The living room furniture was pushed against the walls, creating a makeshift rehearsal space. The record player was positioned prominently, and beside it lay a stack of Motown records. Not just the Supremes, but James Brown, Jackie Wilson, Smokey Robinson, and others. Today, Joseph announced to his bleary-eyed sons, "We begin." What followed was the first of what would become thousands of grueling rehearsal sessions that would eventually transform a group of talented but untrained boys from Gary, Indiana, into the most successful family musical act in entertainment history. Joseph's methods were notoriously strict, his criticism harsh and unsparing. But what few outside the family ever fully understood was the catalyst for this intense regimen. The moment when 5-year-old Michael, fresh from seeing Diana Ross perform, had demonstrated not just extraordinary talent, but a kind of artistic channeling that had transformed Joseph's vague, musical ambitions for his sons into a focused, relentless pursuit of perfection. By mid-morning, neighbors began to gather on the sidewalk outside the Jackson home, drawn by the unusual sounds emanating from the typically quiet household on a Saturday. Through the open windows, they could see Joseph directing his sons through various formations and routines, demonstrating steps, correcting postures. But what truly caught their attention, what caused them to linger despite the summer heat, was the sight of little Michael, a child so small he could barely reach the top of the record player, performing with a precision and presence that seemed to belong to a much older, professionally trained artist. Mrs. Winters from next door, who had known the Jackson family since before Michael was born, stood transfixed on the sidewalk for nearly an hour. Later, speaking to other neighbors, she would struggle to articulate what she had witnessed. "It wasn't like watching a child perform," she finally said. "It was like watching a child transform into something else entirely, something that shouldn't have been possible." This sentiment, this sense of witnessing something that defied ordinary explanation, would be echoed repeatedly over the decades that followed, as Michael Jackson evolved from the precocious lead singer of the Jackson 5 into the globally recognized king of pop. Critics, fellow artists, and audiences worldwide would struggle to find language adequate to describe the phenomenon they were witnessing. But for those who had been present in Gary, Indiana in the days following that pivotal Motown Revue show, the explanation was simple, if no less remarkable. They had witnessed the moment when a 5-year-old boy recognized his life's purpose with perfect clarity and began the single-minded pursuit of an artistic vision that would eventually reshape the very landscape of popular entertainment. Years later, when the Jackson 5 had achieved international fame and were themselves headlining shows that inspired new generations of young performers, Diana Ross, who would become an important mentor and friend to Michael, was asked about her first impressions of the prodigiously talented boy from Gary. Her response was revealing in its simplicity. "From the very beginning," she said, "Michael never imitated. He absorbed. There's a profound difference. Most young performers try to copy what they admire, but Michael seemed to instinctively understand that true artistry isn't about replication. It's about transformation. Even at 9 or 10, when I first met him, he was already transforming his influences into something entirely his own." What Diana Ross couldn't have known when she made that observation was the pivotal role she had played years earlier. How her performance at the Indiana Theater had provided not just inspiration, but a kind of artistic blueprint that had helped shape the development of a talent that would eventually surpass even her own extraordinary achievements. The relationship between inspiration and innovation is rarely straightforward, particularly in the development of genuinely transformative artists. But in the case of Michael Jackson, there exists this remarkably clear moment of catalyst. A single evening when a 5-year-old boy saw Diana Ross perform and recognized not just what he wanted to do, but who he was meant to become. In the decades that followed, as Michael Jackson evolved into the globally recognized king of pop, he would often speak about the formative influence of Motown artists on his artistic development. In interviews, he cited James Brown's energy, Jackie Wilson's showmanship, and Smokey Robinson's songwriting as crucial influences. But when he spoke about Diana Ross, his tone always changed, taking on a quality of reverence that transcended professional admiration. "Diana showed me that performance isn't just about singing or dancing," he once explained. "It's about creating a complete experience for the audience, something they can feel as much as see or hear." That's what I saw that night in Gary, and it's what I've been trying to perfect ever since. This pursuit of the perfect, complete performance experience would become Michael Jackson's artistic signature. From the revolutionary music videos that transformed the medium to the stadium shows that set new standards for live entertainment. And it all began on that summer night in 1963, when a 5-year-old boy sat in the Indiana Theater and witnessed something that resonated so deeply with his own innate understanding of performance that it crystallized into an unshakable sense of purpose. If you've been moved by this glimpse into the moment that helped shape Michael Jackson's extraordinary journey, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we keep alive not just the memory of what Michael Jackson became, but the remarkable story of how that transformation began, with a child who saw his future with perfect clarity and pursued it with singular determination. In a small, carefully preserved scrapbook in the Jackson family archives, there is a faded ticket stub from the Indiana Theater dated June 7, 1963. Beside it, in Katherine Jackson's neat handwriting, is a simple notation: the night Michael found his calling. It is a modest record of what would later be recognized as a pivotal moment in music history. The evening when a 5-year-old boy from Gary, Indiana saw Diana Ross perform and, in doing so, glimpsed his own extraordinary future. That future would include unprecedented achievements. The first music video by a black artist to receive heavy rotation on MTV. The biggest-selling album of all time. Performances that would redefine what was possible in live entertainment. And an artistic legacy that continues to influence performers across genres and generations. But perhaps what's most remarkable about Michael Jackson's story isn't just the heights he ultimately reached, but the clarity with which he saw that path from such an early age. "I can do that," he had said simply, with the quiet certainty of someone recognizing not just a possibility, but an inevitability. And in that moment of recognition, in that transformation from an ordinary child to a vessel for extraordinary purpose, the king of pop began his journey toward the throne.